All right. Okay, we're gonna see if this works now. We're gonna try to. 1 second, make sure all the audio works. So I switched everything over to OBS, and right now I'm running everything through OBS rather than Streamlabs. I suspect Streamlabs might actually be the issue, not YouTube. Certainly doesn't seem to be my hardware. So we've got everything switched over to OBS now. We'll see if this works any better. What a disaster. What a disaster technology it turned out to be today. All right, so it looks like the vertical stream is good. Vertical stream is not lagging right now. I'm going to switch real quick over to the horizontal stream, make sure horizontal stream is rocking and rolling. Horizontal stream should be started. Give me a second. Yep, horizontal stream's running. Okay. Both streams are running. Fantastic. That's what we needed to hear. Okay. So I'll keep track of it then from here, and we should be good to go. I'm so sorry, friends, for the technology hiccups today. I don't know why it's behaving like this. It's ridiculous. But I suspect this should fix the problem. So I think Streamlabs server is having a bad day. The reason why I use Streamlabs rather than OBS typically is because I stream to like 5 different places at once, and every time you open up a new stream, it takes that much bandwidth from your computer and from your home network. However, if you stream to Streamlabs, what happens is it sends one stream over to Streamlabs, and then Streamlabs server will send it out to all the various destinations. So it frees up a lot of bandwidth at home, which is really nice. It's like a super convenient tool. But as we're seeing today, it might only be convenient when it works. It might not always work. I think this might be if I'm seeing this correctly, if it really is an issue on Streamlabs side of things, this might actually be the first time I've ever had a problem with the Streamlabs server. It's really weird. They must be having some sort of a situation today. Probably one of those, one of those attacks. So somebody sent something to the server, they opened up the wrong email, and now they got a virus. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Hey, listen, our friend GenX Christian's now a member of the Kraken Crew Elite. Thank you so much, GenX Christian. I really appreciate that. That's super kind, bud. Okay, so I got the chat windows open. We're ready to rock and roll. We're going to do everything we can. We are live now. I apologize for the hiccups that we had. If you, I think they might not be watchable because the live stream was so choppy prior. I don't know if any of the answers from the previous 2 streams are watchable, so I apologize for that. We've got Mr. Mackey with us, though. Hell yeah, Mr. Mackey. Oh, hold on. I got to adjust my green screen. 1 second. All right. Blah, 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 blah. You can see you're missing the background on the super chat. 1 second. I apologize. I had to do quite a bit of stuff on the last. There we go. There we go. That's pretty good. Now you should be able to read it. Yeah, your internet needs more cowbell. Indeed it does. Actually, I've got a great internet setup right now. I'm actually streaming on fiber. I've got all kinds of internet to work with. My bandwidth is really good. If I get into a situation where my bandwidth is not meeting expectations, then it's got to be on the YouTube server or the Streamlabs server. That seems to be the case because right now we're using OBS, which means 100% of the bandwidth is on my side now. It's using my hardware, and it seems like we're okay. So that being the case, I think we're good to go. I apologize that Streamlabs is doing what Streamlabs do, but what are you gonna do? Sorry about that. SFP says, why are there no humans living in the ocean? It's because Jesus has been coming for 2,000 years straight and he ran out of... That's why the ocean's so salty, obviously. I mean, we could just put two to two together. He ran out of semen because it filled the ocean. That's why the ocean is salty. Yeah, really something. Could you imagine being like, I'm almost coming back. I'm almost coming. And then 2,000 years later, what an unfulfilling session, Jesus. Ridiculous. And Carnage, great to see you, friend. Carnage says, here's for a better internet connection. My resolution this year is to help the needy. Well, thank you, Carnage. I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Carnage. Well, I don't know if I count as needy. I could be wrong. I think I'm getting by with the power of Doug. But I appreciate all the support for the channel. I really do. All the support for the channel is greatly appreciated, friends. And our friend David, welcome to see you, David. Thanks for stopping in. Thank you for the $20 super chat. It says, is God circumcised? Was Jesus at birth if God knew it was necessary? So Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day according to custom. We read this, that's why they went to Jerusalem, according to the Gospels. So it seems like he wasn't born circumcised. Now, whether or not God is circumcised, I assume not, because Paul states that Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God, which means theoretically to Paul thinks that God is, the Father is immaterial. And if that's the case, he doesn't have a peen. So if God doesn't have a peen, then it seems like he's not circumcised. But that would betray the Old Testament, because in the Old Testament, God smells, God hears, he sees, he has all the senses that a human being would have. He even has hands, he has a face. As far as we can tell, the God of the Old Testament does have a body. And if he does have a body, then he would have a peen. Now, whether or not he's circumcised is a different story, because my theory is that circumcision originally developed as a habit for what they thought as cleanliness, because they didn't bathe like we bathed, and so they would get infections. So I think they took after the Egyptians and circumcised themselves rather than bathing regularly enough to avoid infections, and then they had to explain it by saying, "Oh, fuck, God told us to." And if that's the case, if circumcision originated to deal with infection, then it seems to me that God wouldn't need to be circumcised, because I don't think he gets penile infections in heaven. This seems to be the case. I could be wrong, but that's how I'm reading the situation. And Asher says, what's your MBTI type? I think it's ENFJ. I haven't taken it in a long time. But what I can tell you, I forget my letter designation. What I can tell you is that every time I've taken it, I get the same thing as every other engineer. All the engineers end up with the same personality profile from the Myers-Briggs. So like if you just Google the typical engineer Myers-Briggs type inventory, you'll end up with me. So that I forget what it is though. I apologize. But yeah, I think my personality is pretty easy to peg. So there's that. Good question though. Dustin says, good morning, Justin. So one of my favorite talking points is the very obvious inspiration of the Old Testament authors pulled from the surrounding cultures, i.e. flood narrative, Tower of Babel, etc. What do you have a favorite? First of all, the talking point that you like is true. The Old Testament authors did pull from the Babylonian literature. In fact, the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, everything in there, every last story, there's a parallel in the Babylonian literature. So it's just obvious. They pulled from Babylonian literature. Now, the problem is it's hard to prove that to a Christian. So, and it takes a lot of time. So I don't use that argument too often during the debates, but I 100% agree with you. It was one of the things that really catapulted my deconstruction was realizing that these stories weren't authentic and they weren't even native to just the Bible. They were robbed. So if that's the case, and the New Testament treats them like they're legitimate history, well, then the New Testament is not true. That's what that means. But my favorite talking point, and people who know my channel know this, my favorite talking point ever, and I would talk about it every single day. My favorite talking point is, in fact, that Jesus did not fulfill any messianic prophecies, not even one, not even close to one. And so for me, that's all I need to know that Christianity is not true. Now, if you want to debunk the entire Bible, and you're like, listen, it's not good enough just to debunk Christianity. We need to debunk the Old Testament too. If that's the case, if you really want to debunk the Old Testament, I would go in and show all the unscientific stuff in there, the firmament, the flat earth, the bad geological record from the flood, how the animals certainly couldn't have repopulated the earth with what they started from, how the flood story doesn't make any sense because there's no way to get food on the ark for all the carnivorous animals and still have space for them, or how you couldn't collect any food for the koala bears because they have such a specific diet, and the panda bears. Where do you getting all the bamboo from for 371 days? Where's like these narratives they're simply fictitious. They can't be true, right? And so that's a good way of getting at the Old Testament. Also, thank you for sending out 5 Deconstruction Zone memberships, Johanna. It's great to see you, friend. Welcome to the stream. And Brittany says, if Paul thought Jesus died for our sins and the old laws passed away, why did he go to the temple for purification and sacrificial offerings in Acts? My reading of Paul is this. I don't think Paul knows right away what to do. I don't think he knew right away what the situation was. When I'm reading Paul, I'm seeing a Paul that is trying to figure it out as he goes. And so I don't know if Paul knew right away what the situation was. That being said, I don't know if he participated in the sacrificial offerings. I can't think of the section in Acts. In the festival in Acts 21, I think is what you're referring to. Let's grab Acts 21 and take a look at this. We don't get to read Acts 21 very often. In Acts 21, you're almost near the point where he seems like he's getting close to being in custody, but let's get Acts 21 open. So he's giving some of the voyage, and this is some of the famous we passages, which are a lot of fun. So in the famous we passages, it says, when our days there were ended, we left and proceeded on our journey, and all of them, with wives and children, escorted us outside the city. We're there. We know, blah, 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 blah. Did I read? Where is it? That was Acts 21:6. What I miss? What I miss? I grabbed the wrong verse. What I do? Fat finger the verse when I typed it in? All right, give me 1 second. I apologize. What verse was I looking for? Oh, I'm a dummy. It's Acts 21:26. Well, Acts 21:26. Cool. Okay, this is Paul's visit to James in Jerusalem, and then while they're in Jerusalem, says, but as for the Gentiles who have become believers, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and sexual impurity. Yes, this is Acts chapter 15 where this is explained. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having purified himself, he entered the temple with them, making public completion of the days of purification when the sacrifice would be made for each of them. That's actually interesting. Because he didn't have to. That's something I haven't thought about before. This is actually a really interesting question. I can't believe it's never come up before. Because certainly here, there's no requirement, right? Jesus is already dead. There's no requirement to do the purification. I'm curious if there was others with them that were like, no, you got to follow the customs. You got to follow the customs, Paul. But there's obviously more men there. Paul took the men and the next day purified himself. So there's multiple people there. And then, of course, you've got the arrest in coming up right here. Wow, what an interesting... I don't know what to make of that just yet. You'll have to let me look into that. That's a really good question. Shit. Why? What the hell was he doing there? He shouldn't have been there. Let's just... According to Pauline theology, let's just say the thing that needs to be said first, which is that he certainly didn't need to be there to doing any purification acts. If he was doing any rites of purification, it had to be completely voluntary, at least in Paul's point of view. That's actually a really good question. I'm gonna think on that when we get our next question in here. I'm gonna think on a possible answer for that, though. That's a good question. Johanna says God may have a hoodie, maybe he doesn't, but he sure likes collecting them. What if the reason why God collects so-called hoodies is because he doesn't have one and he's jealous? Like, if I can't have one, nobody can. That's what's happening with the foreskin situation. God's like, if I can't have a fucking foreskin, nobody gets one. and if you keep yours, you're in big fucking trouble. Actually, I think that's a believable concept. I'm down with that one. I'm going to see if the internet has any answers. I'm going to say, why did Paul follow purification rites in Acts 21? Surely somebody has an interesting answer to this. Yeah, I mean, everyone's just saying it's out of respect. Yeah, due to respect for the Jewish customs. Yeah, we know, but why? Why does he care? Because he tells everyone else. He tells everyone not to do that. He specifically says not to do it. Maybe the real answer is that Paul's just a hypocrite. You know what I mean? I don't see any good answers on the usual places. I'll hit around for this. Now I want to know the answer too. I don't know if there's a good answer other than Paul's a hypocrite, which we've seen elsewhere, where he tells you not to follow the law. The law has been abolished. That's Ephesians chapter 2, says that it's been completely abolished. But then he goes on later to say, well, if you don't follow these certain laws, you'll go to hell. Like, he talks through both sides of his mouth all the time. This might be one of those cases. Drew says, why couldn't God defeat chariots of iron? Am I safe from God while I'm in my chair? And referring to Judges, there's a passage in Judges. Was it chapter 2? The chariots of iron, I think like 2:11 maybe, if I remember correctly. So there's a passage in Judges 2 where Yahweh goes to battle with the Judeans, and it couldn't defeat them because they had chariots of iron. Let me grab it. It might be Judges 1. I apologize. Probably Judges 1. Right. Oh shit. I'm in Joshua. I want Judges. There we go. Now we're in Judges. Yeah, Judges 1:19. I was off by a bit there. Let me grab Judges 1:19 because it's such a funny thing that this even happens. Judges 1:19. Let me close this out. Shit. Which I got Drew's super chat is open. Okay, let me take care of that. It says, we're gonna get there. The Lord was with Judah. Okay, so they're in battle. And the Lord was with Judah, obviously, because that's, the strength of the people, right? The Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. Now, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of hubbub made about the fact that it says he rather than they. And people will say, because it says he, it must be referring to Yahweh and not to the people. But the people in Hebrew would be ha'am, would be like a collective. Like it's technically singular, but it's used as a collective, or sometimes it's a collective used as a singular. So when it talks about he would mean the people of Judah, right? Or just Judah proper. So you don't have to interpret he as a singular entity like Yahweh. It could actually be referring to the people. Now, here's why that doesn't matter, though. None of that's actually relevant. Whether or not the he is referring to the Lord or to Judah, it doesn't matter, because if the Lord was with Judah, meaning that's why they're winning the war, because the Lord is with them, that means he's still ultimately responsible for the failure of not being able to drive out the chariots of iron. And this is not the first time God couldn't do something. Think of Mark chapter 6, verse 5 and 6, where Jesus couldn't heal people because of their lack of faith. And we, of course, 2 Kings or 1 Kings chapter 2. I always forget it's 1 or 2 Kings. I'm going to say 2 Kings 2, where there's a war with Moab. And they get fucked up by Moab because the king of Moab sacrifices his son in the middle of the losing battle. So God does in fact lose. Like there are things he can't do in the Bible and in the Hebrew Bible. Was it 2 Kings 3? I'll try this again. My memory's off today. I need more sleep. Yeah, 2 Kings chapter 3. Is when they lose the war to the Moabites. The prophet Jehoshaphat, or the prophets alongside Jehoshaphat, literally said that they're going to win the war. God will deliver them into your hands. And then what happens is the opposite of that. It says, then he took his firstborn, King Mesha, firstborn son, who was to succeed him, and offer him as a burnt offering on the wall. And great wrath came upon Israel, so they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. So God just can't do some shit in the Bible. And those are two cases where God clearly can't do things. It's pretty crazy to think about, actually. Let me grab the next one. Great question. Roger says, hi from a creepy EE, but not a bad coder. Well, this is a crappy EE, I apologize. Well, listen, you'd be surprised how many electrical engineers spent their career coding rather than doing electrical engineering work, and how many coders I've met that did like a computer science degree that ended up doing electrical engineering. There's a lot of crossover. Now, one thing I've seen lately in like the last 10 years is in the field of controls and the field of automation, they're hiring a lot more people with computer science or computer engineering backgrounds than they are electrical engineers, because they can do the same thing as control engineers can do typically. They can do electrical drawings. And then on top of it, they're really good at coding. And almost all electrical engineers today have to be able to do coding. So welcome. Edward says, have you considered W is not W? I haven't considered that. Words are not words. I do appreciate the formulation. That's actually a really good one. We should do, to shorten down that slogan, we can do words don't mean words in that particular format. And I love this format. We'll make this a reality. This is a good idea. And Johanna says, quick question. How do I change my credit card? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea, actually. I assume you mean within YouTube. Like you have to give it your credit card information when you sign up to send super chats. And that I don't know. When I first started sending super chats, it asked me for my payment information and I entered it and I don't know where it went to. It's in the ether now. The ether owns it. YouTube owns it. I don't know how to change it, my friend. Marcus, thank you for the question. Says, what is the specific arguments you've heard from apologists that make sense of the detailed instructions of animal sacrifice in Ezekiel's vision of the Messianic temple? Well, first of all, I've only heard one person attempt to address it. Most theists don't know it's there. Most Christians don't know it's even there. They have no idea what to do with it. That being said, the ones that are aware of it had tried to say, well, when Jesus comes back, the sacrificial system and the land and everything is going to be restored. And then we're going to do the sacrifices and offerings. Therefore, Ezekiel's not lying. It's going to happen when he comes back. But this is stupid. This is a stupid apologetic because the entirety of the New Testament teaches that Jesus was the final sacrifice. That's it. We don't need any of these sin sacrifices from Ezekiel 45. We don't need them. Jesus was the last one, once and for all, one and done. So that, as for an argument against Ezekiel, I've never heard a good one. I've heard arguments. I've never heard a good argument. The reality is Christians aren't reading the Old Testament. They're sure as hell not reading Ezekiel. Doc Pleroma, thank you for the question. Also, friends, I can't stream late today, so I've already got a bunch of questions in the queue. So I'm going to end it here in like a half hour or 45 minutes because I'm taking my son to the beach. We're going to go have a lot of fun. So I'm going to get through all the questions that we have now. Unfortunately, we wasted a bunch of time on non-working streams. Those streams are working with OBS. Maybe in the future, I'll just use OBS. Maybe I won't use Streamlabs anymore if Streamlabs can't cooperate. But we got a question from Doc says, do you think Paul would be baffled or amused by how much we obsess over his thorn in his side? Maybe he just wanted a good excuse to skip a few meetings. Oh, this is such a good point. So, no one really knows what the thorn in Paul's side is, but when he uttered those words, did he believe that people would be wasting valuable time trying to figure out what the hell the thorn in the side was? No way. No way he thought that. And the fact that people do, the fact that people literally obsess over these super irrelevant topics just shows you that the state of Christianity is a crazy one. They don't want to go out and feed the poor. They don't want to go out and help the homeless. They don't want to do the stuff that Jesus told them to do. They want to obsess over nonsense and then have church divides over like whether or not a woman can speak in public or whether or not you need to be dipped going forward or backwards when you get baptism, or whether or not you can be sprinkled rather than dipped. They don't want to do any real stuff. Doug Brown says that Doug's namesake and prophet bids you all hello. Well, thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate that. Hail Doug and Doug Brown, both Dougs. And Buget says in Matthew 26:6, Jesus really saying, F the poor. That perfume and its dollar value is better spent on me. Kind of shitty of him. So this is the funny thing, Matt, not Matt, Buget. I agree with you. Your interpretation of Matthew is correct. So Jesus is essentially saying that paying him homage is more important than the people that are literally got children starving to death. Just imagine that for a second. Jesus could have sold the perfume, could have had somebody sold the perfume and been like, here's some help. Now, here's the crazy thing. Remember, Jesus did magic, right? People always forget this, but never forget this. Jesus did magic, which means when Jesus was alive on earth, at least in Judea, nobody had to be poor. Nobody had to be homeless. Nobody had to be starving. He could just did magic and poof, all you have food now. He didn't do any of that. Imagine if you had magical powers, all the problems you would fix. The fact that the Bible, Jesus had all these powers and he didn't fix shit, that tells you it's fiction. It's not a real story. It's a fantasy, friends. And Marcus, thank you for the additional question, says, why theologically does Jesus tell Jews during the Sermon on the Mount after healing the leper to offer animal sacrifices when he was the Lamb of God and was already forgiving sins while alive? Such a good point. And Rabbi Tovia Singer brings this up as well quite a bit, which is when you read the book of Matthew, the biggest Judaizer in the book of Matthew is Jesus himself. Like Paul, there's a big deal made in theology about Paul combating Judaizers. Like Paul is out there trying to battle against the Judaizers. But reality is his biggest opponent was Jesus. Nobody was more Judaizing than Jesus himself. The dude did want you to follow the law. He told you to. He told you to follow the law in Matthew chapter 5, 17 through 19. And he does this. And when the rich young ruler comes to him and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He says to follow the commandments. When he heals the people, he tells them to go to the temple and be ritually cleansed, which you have to do according to the Old Testament. If you had leprosy or some sort of skin rash and it came and it was cleansed, you still had, or it disappeared, it went away, you still had to go get cleansed and then have a waiting period. before you could be welcomed back into the community. So yeah, Jesus was a Judaizer. That's why he said to do this. The reality is Paul and Jesus do not agree. And Paul continually talking out both sides of his mouth, as we just actually talked about in Acts chapter 21 that somebody brought up, which is that Paul in Acts chapter 21, verse 26, went to the temple and participated in the purification rituals. Like, so the New Testament does not have a cohesive, absolutely does not have a cohesive viewpoint on the law. And Dustin says, one thing I've noticed watching your streams is that when backed into a corner, every theist argument eventually boils down to a presupposition, whether they realize it or not. Have you noticed this? It is, Dustin. It is. Every single Christian argument, when you've knocked down their claims about the flood nonsense, about prophecy nonsense, they always end up in a position where it's, well, I just presuppose it by faith. Well, you can't explain X, therefore God. They always go back to a God of the gaps. And this is how you know that they simply don't have any answers, because they have to fall back on God of the gaps. They have to fall back on it's true because I presuppose it to be true. And these aren't good ways to know truth. You can't know truth in this particular fashion. TV Atheist says, I keep telling you OBS is pro level. OBS is good. In fact, when I first started doing streams, I was only using OBS. The reason why I switched to Streamlabs, and I paid the money for Streamlabs, is to lower the actual amount of bandwidth that I personally needed to use. So I could stream multiple streams to YouTube, I could stream to Facebook, I could stream to Twitch, so on and so forth. And then I could run TikTok Studio alongside of it and not have lagging on TikTok Studio. So that's why I switched to Streamlabs. But now that I'm running fiber at home, shit, maybe I'll just use OBS. It seems like I've got plenty of bandwidth on my fiber network to open as many streams as I need. Of course, I could just not stream to Twitch. Nobody gives a shit about Twitch. No one's watching these debates on Twitch. So maybe it is time to switch to OBS. OBS does give me a lot more control over some of the features as well. So I do like that. With Streamlabs, they limit some of the controls you can have. And Nomad, thank you for the question, says, can you speak a bit on the trial of bitter waters, Numbers 5:11? I brought this up in a discussion on abortion with a Christian once, but I need more context. So this is really good. Actually, my friend Chet and I are going to be doing a session kind of on this topic here in a bit. So the trial of bitter waters works like this. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon a man and he believes that his wife cheated on him, now this is probably happening because she's fucking pregnant. And he's like, I don't think I got her pregnant. How'd you get pregnant, right? It's hard to know when the spirit of jealousy could fall on somebody, right? That being said, if that happens, what you need to do is take her to the priest. He'll make a potion he'll write a curse on a scroll, scrape it off. The scrapings go into the potion. Some dirt from the floor go into the potion. She drinks this cursed potion. It's basically poison. And if it makes her really sick and causes her womb to discharge, then it's presumed that she's guilty and she won't be able to bear the children. If in fact she's innocent, the potion won't harm her and she'll be able to bear children or conceive. So the reality is, if he was accusing her, my goodness, I gotta get more sleep. If he was accusing her because she is pregnant and he doesn't think it's his, then she would have a miscarriage or an abortion. That's why the newest iteration of the NIV just says abortion. The pregnancy is going to be terminated. So Numbers 5 is indeed an abortion. Now, it's fun because it's very similar to what's known as the river ordeal. In ancient Sumer and Babylon and Assyria, they believed that there were like river deities that caused the rivers to rage and lower and rage and lower. And so one of the ways you could test the unfaithfulness of a spouse is to throw them in the river. Like if you come and you got the spirit of jealousy, rather than making them take the magic poison, you could just take them to the judge and throw their ass in a river. And depending on what happens in the river, that determines whether or not they were guilty, because the river god will determine whether or not they were innocent or guilty. So it's a really fun thing. We're going to talk about that soon. All right, I see more questions coming in, friends. I'm going to answer all the questions that we have on the board, and then I've got to end the stream. I'm sorry we wasted so much time on getting the stream transferred over to a working platform. It just was one of those days. But I've got hard plans today. I'm going to the beach with my son. We're going to have a lot of fun, so I can't stay late. I'm going to answer these questions. I got to scoot. Mediocre, still love the name, says, as a debate prompt, have you considered Abrahamic religions are regurgitated Babylonian or whatever mythology? It seems like a great topic. I agree. It is a great topic. And the reason why I don't have a topic like that is because it really narrows down the conversation. And my streams are typically like 5 or 6 hours, right? Which means for 5 or 6 hours, the audience hears the same talking points over and over and over again because it's such a narrow topic. Now we could do it in like a multi-topic format where we do a live stream and like, here are the multiple topics we can talk about today. And that would make it a little easier, or I can preserve it. I can make a topic like this for like when I know I'm only going to have 2 or 3 hours to debate. Then we can definitely do that. But I do like the idea. It certainly is a good idea to do a topic where, like, you know, the Old Testament is stolen from other literature. That'd be a lot of fun. Or you could say the Old Testament is stolen mythology. I would have a lot of fun with that. I did do a live stream like over a year ago where I did that with this Hell and Satan, where I did Hell and Satan are stolen mythologies. They're not native to the Bible. And that was a lot of fun. Nicholas says, do the Sanhedrin record Jesus? And can I read it? Yes. Sanhedrin 43a records what we would call the trial and the execution of Jesus the Nazarene. It says he was stoned and hung up on a stick. It even talks a little bit about how some of his disciples were killed. And it even talks about why he was killed for sorcery and leading the people astray. And his mother even comes up. So I would read Sanhedrin 43a. And Dr. Pizza said, do people ever address the point that the point of the flood was to cleanse the land of evil, but it didn't work? Any other incompetent God goofs? So I did this when I first started streaming to TikTok before I was on YouTube. I used to run a topic that was the flood of Noah was a failure. And I listed all the reasons why the flood of Noah was an absolute failure. The reality is most Christians don't realize it. If the goal of the flood was to rid the planet of the evil humans and of the Nephilim, neither came true. It says right after the flood that the intentions of the heart of humans are evil even from youth. And then we learned that there's more Nephilim left over. Numbers chapter 13, Deuteronomy chapter 2. There's more Nephilim. They're still fucking around, which means the flood didn't do a damn thing. Tirana says, with Bible degrees, what's the job career prospect? Not much. Either you're a pastor, or you're an independent media content creator, or you get a high level degree like a PhD and you teach. That's about it. You can't do much else. That's like saying, I got a law degree, but I don't want to practice law. What can I do? Not much. Not much. It's a very specific degree. It's not universally usable. Dennis says, is it fair to ask Christians if they follow Jesus or Paul? It seems like two very different religions. It is, Dennis. It is. And I've had a lot of people request to do a live stream where I just say, you're not a Christian, you're a Paulian. And while it's a very narrow topic, which is why I haven't done it, it is true. I do, when we talk about Bible contradictions, I talk a lot about how Paul and Jesus contradicted each other because I think it's important. If you are a modern day Christian, you are following Paul. You're not following Jesus. That's just a cold, hard truth. I've got some of the Jesus-Paul contradictions on the cheat sheet. Don says, an idea inspired either by Doug or Sparky, I can't choose. Does evolution present a problem for Christianity? Required immortal soul in the unbroken line of life, whose mother didn't have a soul. So I agree with you. In fact, if you read, like, there's a study Bible called the Didache Study Bible, if I remember correctly. I've got it. It's a Catholic study Bible, and they've got an article written about this, how Catholicism is always in agreement with science, even if it's hard to understand. And I had a professor who was part of the BioLogos Foundation who believed in this kind of thing. where evolution is true, but so is the Bible. And this was the question I brought up to him, and he didn't like it. He's a great guy. He just didn't like my question. But my question was exactly that. If in fact evolution is true, where did God draw the arbitrary line of now we have humans that have like rights and the image of God and the immortal soul? Like where did that point start? You have to draw a line somewhere. It's a silly thing to believe in, but if you're coping, this is a good advanced level of cope. You know, I'm with you. I don't think there's a good answer for it. That's why it's a good question. Punctuated says, what do you think of the Midianite hypothesis? Punctuated, I believe wholeheartedly in the Midianite hypothesis. I've got a bunch of articles and documents in archaeology that points towards this. If you DM me, I'll send you my articles. You can read all about it. I think the Midianite hypothesis is a great hypothesis to explain the rise of Yahwism and to explain the rise of Yahwism specifically within Judea, and then eventually into all of Israel. Carnage with another question. I love these questions. Thank you so much, Carnage. Says, Smash, Marry, or Unalive, Music Edition, Prince of Egypt, Jesus Christ Superstar, or the Book of Mormon. Listen, I'm going to hurt your feelings. I have not seen Jesus Christ Superstar, so I don't know. I haven't even seen the Book of Mormon, but if I'm going to marry one of them, I know the premise of the Book of Mormon. I'm going to marry the Book of Mormon. I'm going to smash Jesus Christ Superstar because I think it's probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and I'm going to unalive the Prince of Egypt only because it's boring and we've already heard the Joseph story so many times. But good question. That's a tough one, actually. I appreciate that. All right, guys, I've got a couple more super chats. I like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 8 more, and then I gotta get off stream. I apologize, I can't stream later today, but I'll be doing a long stream tomorrow. Tomorrow's gonna be a long stream. It should be a lot of fun. Kyle, and I'm streaming Saturday and Sunday. So I'll be streaming over the weekend too. Says, when you were a Christian, did you believe or trust all the Bible narratives such as the flood, ark? If so, what was that like? Do you think Christians secretly doubt some parables but still argue they're true? Okay, so when I was a brand new evangelical Christian, like I grew up in Catholicism, and they taught these stories, but they didn't really teach them at my Catholic school like they're true history. They were akin to mythology. When I became a born again like evangelical Christian, I was like, no, it's got to be all true. It has to be all true. So I did have a period early on where I was like, no, it's true. But I very quickly started doing studying the apologetics on these topics, and then studying the counter apologetics on these topics. And quickly, as an evangelical Christian, I realized, oh no, they can't be literally true. The science is so against it. And so I quickly moved I reverted back to, okay, these are like theological stories. They didn't literally happen, or some of them literally happened, but they were exaggerated, right? And I did that for a little bit. The reality is, though, once you study the New Testament and realize that everybody in the New Testament thought they were literal stories that literally happened, you got big problems. They can't hold water. Emma says, can you go more in depth on the differences merging of Judah and Israel? Is this merger where Yahweh become one true God? Kind of, yes. So I'm going to take you quickly to Exodus 6. So in Exodus 6, we have a statement that's really interesting. And Mark Smith has written about this, about how Israel went from a polytheistic worldview eventually into a monotheistic worldview. But in Exodus 6, we have a really strange thing where Moses is given the name of the Lord. And it says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. Well, this is kind of a weird thing, right? When I read this, what I'm reading here is that Yahweh is suggesting, listen, I know your forefathers knew me as so-and-so, but my real name is Yahweh. This is a crazy thing to say if you're a deity. Why would you tell everyone that, hey, I'm Elohim, I'm El, and then, 1,000 years later be like, oh, by the way, my real name is Yahweh. Why? What are we doing here? Why would we do that? That's the dumbest thing ever. It doesn't make any sense. And so to me, there's lots of Bible passages, if you're reading carefully, that seem like copes. And there's a lot of Bible passages that seem like they were stolen from Israelite literature. For example, Psalm 74, Psalm 82. Psalm 82 classically talks about how there are multiple gods. If you go to Psalm 82, it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. This is in alignment with Israelite theology, not Judean theology, right? So the reality is, it seems to be, if you read, go ahead and read the Baal cycle. Mark Smith did a really good translation of the Baal cycle, where you learn about El and his 70 sons that he had with Atirot, known as Asherah. And you learn about Baal and Anath and all of these other deities that show up in the Hebrew Bible. There's like 10 different deities from the Israelite pantheon, the Canaanite pantheon, that show up in the Old Testament. And a lot of the words in Hebrew were stolen directly from Ugaritic tradition. The word for death is moth, or moth, or muth, depending on how you conjugate the word. Well, the deity of death in the El pantheon, the pantheon of El, one of the children of El, was Mot. The sun deity, Shemesh or Shamash, is the word for sun in biblical Hebrew. Like they merged two cultures. The Judeans worshipped Yahweh, probably developed through the Midianite hypothesis. The Israelites worshipped El and the pantheon that was associated with El. And eventually, when the Judeans got powerful, the Judeans took over Israel. They had to merge the religions. They had to merge the backgrounds. Again, I would read the writings of Mark S. Smith on this, and I would also read Yahweh and the Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Canaan by John Day. Great reads. Dave says, is there an argument to be made that the apostles in part could have seen Jesus as a way to change their station in life, more respect, money? Well, that certainly is the case, Dave. A lot of people say, well, they wouldn't have lied. They had nothing to gain. We don't know that. In fact, we don't even know how they died. They didn't even die as martyrs. Hundreds of years later, people made up stories about how they died. It could be that at the time of Jesus' death, they had a big following of Galileans. And they had support. It's clear from the New Testament that a lot of wealthy women were supporting the movement. They probably didn't want to give up that cash cow. They probably wanted to continue that gravy train. Hey, we're just going to keep doing this thing, and Jesus will come back eventually. But in the meantime, yeah, we'll let all these women support our ministry. Why not? All right, I got a couple more super chats. Johanna says, I'm going to make a t-shirt that says everything I know about the Bible I learned from Justin. There's a lot about the Bible I don't know. There's a lot of good people out here to learn from. I'm humbled that you think I'm one of them. I really appreciate that, Johanna. At least I'm glad I can put my education to use. And Forum says, what was the purpose of the story of the lineage of Cain in Genesis? Why did the author just leave off after the murder of Abel? Okay, so the lineage in Genesis, we're talking about Genesis chapter 4 and 5. The purpose of these lineages are to explain where things came from. Where did we get iron smelting? Where did we get this people group from, right? So the goal of this is to say, okay, we've got these people groups, you know about them. Here's where they came from, right? And what you'll find in Genesis, when we get these people groups, it's always the people groups that Israel don't like. These people, well, they came from bad ancestors. They came from people that were bad in the lineage. Like the descendants of Ham were the Canaanites, and the Canaanites were cursed to be slaves to the Israelites. And so the justification for what they did to the Canaanites was, in fact, the story of Noah, right? So the lineage that we find in Genesis is an explanation for the state of affairs between them and the people groups around them. And the 10 Commentarium says, prove me wrong. Israelites did not own chattel slaves after being freed 400 years from slavery and lived in the wilderness in tents with no farms. First chattel slaves were Midianite virgins and Gibeonite males. Well, I mean, we have no reason to believe that. We hear about slaves even in the book of Exodus. If you just go to the book of Exodus and do a word search on the word slaves, it seems to be that they're being prepared to own slaves while they're in the desert. And if the first time that they owned slaves were the Midianite virgins, you're referring to Numbers chapter 31, that was while they were in the desert. Numbers 31 is while they were wandering around in the desert. So if they took those virgins as slaves and they killed all the Midianites, then in fact they owned slaves while they were in the desert during the period of the Exodus. Numbers and Exodus run parallel to each other. They're not in the promised land yet in the book of Numbers. I mean, they're spying the promised land, you know what I mean? But so I don't know what to tell you. The Israelites obviously did own chattel slaves directly after being freed from slavery for 400 years. And the example you listed proves that I'm right. I don't know what to tell you. Thank you for the super chat, though. And Godwin says, is Judaic circumcision reformed human sacrifice? I don't think so. I don't think it was a derivative of human sacrifice. What I think is they learned it from the Egyptians who are already doing it, which lends credence to the idea that there was a contingent of Hebrew people that did live either on the border of Egypt or even in the land of Avaris that eventually left. Maybe they were part of the Hyksos expulsion, who knows? What we do know is that they probably picked up the act of circumcision from the Egyptians, and then when the Judeans became the most powerful people in their narrative, was the end-all, be-all of the people group, obviously circumcision, they had to come up with a reason for it. And the reason for the circumcision was explained through Abraham. Because if they're going to force it on everybody, you need it to come from God. Elteen says, no question, but just wanted to say I very much admire how much you prioritize your son and spending time with him. Enjoy the beach, friend. Well, thank you so much, Elteen. I really, really, really appreciate that. That's super generous. And the $50 super chat is very generous, Elteen. Big W, big W. And Johanna says, you might want to marry Jesus Christ Superstar. He was very good looking. I'll consider that. I don't know who played the role. I'll take a look into it, though. Thank you for the information. And Randy, thank you for sending out 10 Deconstruction Zone memberships. That's huge, my friend. Thank you so much. I've got two more. And I got to cut it, guys. Forum says, please enjoy your day at the beach. Have an ice cream on me. Well, thank you so much, Forum. And I think we will. I think we're going to have some ice cream. It should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. He's never been in a body of water with waves yet. There's a big lake. I can't tell you what that actually has waves. And I'm so excited because he's never seen waves before. So the first time a 6-year-old experiences waves is fun. And last one says, thanks, was just trying to give you a challenge. I love a good challenge. I appreciate a good challenge. And it certainly was, I think, in good faith. So big W to that. And I'll do another Q&A next week. So I apologize. This one had to be so short. Apologize, Streamlabs. Obviously, it's dog shit software sometimes. But I'll be live tomorrow doing debates. I'll be live Saturday and Sunday doing debates. And so there's going to be lots of debates coming up, and I'll make sure and plan time for a longer Q&A next week. We can get all of our questions out. Apologize, we have to cut this one short. But thank you so much for being here, friends.